Well, good afternoon to you. It is now 5:07 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630 WMAL. A coronation for Kamala Harris. She was made the nominee weeks ago over Zoom. She accepted in a speech in Chicago last night. And here are a couple of the lies she told about her political opponent.
Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens. Consider the power he will have, especially after the United States Supreme Court just ruled that he would be immune from criminal prosecution.
Another despicable attempt by the left to whip people into a frenzy. This as various people have been threatening to kill. One even took a shot at Donald Trump, an attempted assassination. Just awful. Joining us now to discuss especially this line about, Trump's going to arrest journalists. It's bizarre considering the Biden-Harris administration has been doing that very thing. Steve Baker joins us now. He's an investigative reporter for The Blaze, and he was arrested by the Biden administration. Steve, good to have you with us, sir.
Hey, Vince. Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Give just your first reaction just to this portion of Kamala's speech. What were you thinking as you heard it?
Well, let me tell you something. I was actually here in the second city last night watching that speech. I'm in Chicago still at the moment. I've been here all week. And I'm telling you, if ever there was a moment in that speech where your blood wants to boil, because it hit me personally. I mean, you talk about a shot right between the eyes. That's what that was. And we could go down that entire list of items that she rattled off there from her teleprompter, and we could dismantle every single one of them piece by piece. Obviously, it's projection. Obviously, it's some form of gaslighting. Obviously, her crowd is willing to accept all of that, and it is fear-mongering. But the reality is that every single thing that she warned against in that arena is what her and her party are already doing, even to the point of the militarization of our government's forces against the American people. Because make no mistake about it, Vince, when an FBI SWAT team of over 20 agents shows up at your house in the morning with automatic weapons trained on you, your wife, and your children on your front porch at 6:30 a.m., with the red dots on your wife's chest and on your children's foreheads, it doesn't matter whether their uniform says FBI or it says Green Beret. It doesn't matter.
Yes,
that is the militarization of our forces against people, and we're talking about swatting misdemeanor defendants. That's not the violent ones that she was talking about. And there were some violent people that day. Out of the hundreds of thousands of people, though, a micro fraction actually did any violence. Somewhere between 200 and 300 people actually assaulted law enforcement in some form or the other. But that's not the portrayal that we've looked at for the last 3.5 years.
Yes. And to remind people, you were arrested by the Biden-Harris administration because you covered the events of January 6th from the inside. You just went in and covered it, and they subjected you to the horror that you're now describing.
That's correct. And I'll tell you something else that was really ironic that happened to me this week while I was here in Chicago. I had a couple hours to kill on Wednesday afternoon. I went into a cigar lounge about a half a block from my hotel, and the only other person sitting in there was a photojournalist. I could tell because he had all of his cameras out and was monkeying with them. And I asked him if he was in town covering the event. Yes, he lives in Baltimore. He travels all over the world as a riot chaser. He's employed by a division of Reuters. And I asked him if he covered January 6th since he lived so close there. He said, yes. As a matter of fact, I did. I said, did you go in the Capitol? He said, yes, I did. Have you been charged? Were you arrested? Well, no, I haven't. Have you been contacted by the FBI? Well, no, I haven't.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he works for the right news outlets. That's he's protected. That's why that happened. So and you're not alone. There's been a number of stories that receive very little attention of journalists and people who've done journalism who've been raided, arrested, or attacked by the Biden administration. One that comes to mind is James O'Keefe's home was raided. In the Ashley Biden diary saga, he was pulled outside in his boxers as they raided his home. The FBI searching for Ashley Biden's diary. He was guilty of nothing but journalism in that case. Additionally, Kamala Harris has a history of this too. In 2016, she had ordered state agents in California to raid a pro-life journalist by the name of David Daleiden, who was covering Planned Parenthood at the time. So this is her history, and she stands up there on that stage and projects that it's actually Donald Trump who's going to be the threat to journalism.
Yeah, and there are, of course, as you mentioned, several other journalists who have been, they've been unfairly prosecuted by this Department of Justice for doing nothing but journalism. They didn't join the mob, as they are characterized. They did no violence. They did no property damage. They didn't participate in any picketing or parading or anything of the sort. But as you already mentioned, if you don't release your story or license your video to the right sources, you're likely to be caught up in the dragnet. Now, my agency was Storyful. My videos were licensed to HBO, to New York Times, to news agencies all over the country. The very first media source right there in your town was WUSA 9 to use one of my videos that day on January 6th itself. And so despite the fact that they use and licensed my videos, when I started writing my stories, I didn't see the event through the exact same prism as if you wrote for the New Yorker or New York Times or someone else.
Let me. You mentioned that you can debunk all of these things that she said. So let me start that clip from the top again, because she talks about how Donald Trump wants to free, quote, violent extremists. Take a listen.
Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol.
Okay, so if my memory serves, wasn't it Kamala Harris who was supporting a bail fund to spring people out of jail who are destroying Minneapolis?
That's exactly correct. I mean, she was the one that actually, for violent offenders, people that burned down cities in the summer of love of 2020, post George Floyd's death, she was the one that was sponsoring and calling for donations for this foundation that did that very thing, was to release those violent and destructive offenders back onto the street.
Yes.
And this is exactly the opposite of what she did. But she was also more explicit in her lie, because she said it was Trump's explicit intent to release and pardon the violent offenders. He has not said that. He said that he would look at every case on its individual merits. He was inclined to certainly pardon the nonviolent offenders. But look, I would be surprised if any administration would pardon people that overtly and blatantly attacked law enforcement inappropriately and, of course, unprovoked that day.
Yeah, and yesterday, actually, President Trump brought a woman to the border whose skull was cracked by an illegal alien in San Francisco. That illegal alien was free and able to crack her skull because of Kamala Harris at the time. So the history here is crystal clear. It's Kamala Harris who's been springing violent criminals out into the public and placing a lot of people in peril, and yet again, a case of projection.
Well, that's exactly what it is. And if you are even a criminal, but your criminal act is performed in the, let's just say, the line of the leftist duty and narrative, then that's the type of treatment that you can expect to get, at least early on, at least until you finally kill somebody or rape somebody. But then we have examples of that, Vince.
Yeah.
We have examples of people who have committed sexual assault crimes against American girls or American women and have been released back on the street to yet again do more damage.
By the Biden-Harris administration, quite unfortunately.
That's
Imagine if we had a
absolutely
media. Imagine if we had a media to cover all of it. So, Steve, since you're here, I really appreciate if you could give us an update on your battle against the Biden-Harris administration. What are you dealing with now?
Yeah, actually, I have a court date set in November for my 4 misdemeanors, my 4 misdemeanor charges. And, of course, no violence, no property damage, anything of that nature. We have motions in process for continuance. I do not want to go to trial up against a D.C. jury the week after the election because it's set for November 12th. So I think that we may be successful in pushing this back until after the first of the year. But then we also have motions actually to be filed today for dismissal on the basis of selective prosecution, just like I mentioned earlier. I met that photojournalist who went into the Capitol. And as you probably are well aware, a press badge is not a license to enter a restricted space. It is you are only allowed as a journalist to enter a restricted space if you are given permission by law enforcement. This particular photojournalist, I asked him, were you wearing your press credentials that day? He said, no, I typically don't at riots. It typically puts me in greater danger to have my credentials displayed. And then also this week at the Israeli consulate here in Chicago, I did, in fact, flash my press credentials to get through a police line. And they just parted. As soon as they saw my press credentials, they allowed me to pass through. So I was given permission. Now, if I had tried to push my way through there, even though I had them in my pockets or even though I had them displayed, they would have arrested me because you're not allowed to without the express permission of law enforcement. And that's what happened on January 6th, is some 60 journalists of all types, photojournalists, reporters, television reporters, et cetera, breached those barricades, entered restricted territories, breached those windows, those doors, entered a restricted building, and they have not been charged because they had the right narrative in their stories following the day.
Look, no journalist should be charged for covering the news. I mean, it just as a common sense matter, like anybody who would be responsible for making these types of decisions shouldn't be charging reporters, and they're charging you for very political reasons. It's outrageous, and I'm grateful for you and for your time as always, Steve. Thank you for joining us again today. All right. Let's see. We got a lot of calls coming in. Our buddy Phil calls in from Fredericksburg. He's on line 1. Hello, Phil. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, look, Vince, I just wanted to say that was 100% impressive from RFK Junior. He really did stand up for freedom. His address, I followed it on YouTube. I listened to the rest of it. He went after the makers of Ozempic, who the Danish government doesn't even recommend that their people use that. And they said it's going to cost. There is a bill in Congress that's going to cost the American people trillions of dollars a year if this goes into Medicaid and Medicare. He went after the processed food lobby, which is killing American poor people. The man is really should be in the Trump cabinet for Health and Human Services. He is a great American, just like Donald Trump is a great American. Oh, and one last thing, Dan Bongino today called Kamala Harris's presidency the Ren and Stimpy presidency. It is such a perfect description put down on those two, the Ren and Stimpy presidency. Oh my funny. God, it was perfect.
That's hilarious.
So anyway,
I love that. So wait a second. Before Phil, first of all, Phil, by the way, everything Phil said is totally correct. And you can tell Phil is a very educated person every time he calls in. And that's an excellent breakdown of all the things that occurred today. I do want to point something out, though, about Phil's call today. Phil, I know you're probably ready for this, but I want to share with everyone what you said yesterday. Corey has done me the service of preparing it. Here is Phil calling in yesterday about the possibility of RFK endorsing Trump. Here's what Phil said yesterday.
There is no way in blazes that RFK is going to endorse Trump tomorrow. I'm telling you.
Is this a wait? So Phil, are you eating crow today? A little bit.
I am proud to be wrong and proud to know RFK Junior and Donald Trump are working together to save America. I am proud to be wrong.
That's good. Yeah, see, I've been wrong about plenty of things. It's good. It's good when it's a learning experience. Thank you, Phil. I'm happy you were wrong too. I really appreciate the call, sir. God bless you. That's pretty funny. Phil yesterday. There is no way. Did he say in blazes? No way in blazes. And sure enough, it happened. Although I don't think RFK's running mate Shanahan has endorsed Trump. I think she put out a statement or something on Twitter that was like, I don't support either party. Okay, that's fine. Anyway, RFK has endorsed Trump today, and he's backing the Trump campaign, especially in those battleground states. The news today, RFK is removing his name from all of those battleground state ballots to clear the decks for Trump. If, in case you were wondering, oh no, doesn't that help the left? No, not according to all of the available data on this question. RFK was taking from Trump, so now he's working with him to try and defeat Kamala Harris. Let me get Nick in Purcellville in here, line 2. Nick, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. I think the most despicable, I guess that would be the adjective to use, thing that happened at the convention was Unplanned Parenthood's Killmobile that they rolled in.
Yeah.
Last count, I think it was like 27 abortions that they performed there. That was like a couple of days ago. I don't know what the final count was, but I'd like to know if they gave out T-shirts, and what it would say on the T-shirt. I killed the future here at the convention. I mean, what could you say about it?
We've come a long way from safe, legal, and rare, haven't we? They put a kill wagon outside that they brag about the kill streak this week. As you pointed out earlier this week, I saw they were claiming 25. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's 27. Either way, it's a lot of lives snuffed out in a very brazen way at the Democrat convention. It's because it's a religion. It's a cult. It's a death cult to the point that they're doing literally the opposite of what people in real religions would do. It's really, really, really scary stuff. Thank you. I thought it was despicable too, and I think any decent American would. Coming up, I got a lot more for you out of that wild convention and what's ahead in this wild race. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The left orchestrated the old switcheroo, remember? They got rid of Biden, replaced him with Kamala, and now they're bragging about it. Kind of brazenly. They can't help themselves. The whole party's controlled from the top. It's not really a grassroots thing. We just say that. We just play pretend. I've got some audio to support that in a moment from some of the luminaries of their party. Before I get there, though, I want to take a call or two. I've got Rick calling in from Reston on line 1. Hello, Rick. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hello, Mr. Coglianese.
Hey, Rick.
I felt like I needed to call in support of Phil, at least to stand in the same place he is, and that yesterday I was talking to my beloved spouse saying I didn't think there was a snowball's chance in Hades that this thing would actually happen with RFK. I don't know the significance of it, but I didn't think it would happen. I figured in some way he would be bought off or pressured out or something like that. So, Phil, I'm sure you're still listening. I made the exact same prediction with almost the same words you did, and I guess I'm glad I was wrong about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you were wrong about it too. You don't have to confess it though, Rick. There's no obligation for that. I'm wrong about things sometimes. I tell my wife things that don't turn out to be true all the time. But this one, I'm encouraged by it. What did you think of the fact that RFK did it? What does that tell you?
Well, it shows a degree of independence, so genuine independence that he has, which, maybe shouldn't be such a surprise. One can get pretty cynical about people's real character and intentions and motivations and things like that. So I think that's fantastic. It is always better to be right than wrong, back to your first point there about not having to confess something.
That is true.
Again, with the significance of it, I got to assume it's at least some small marginal benefit to, President Trump. But, we'll see. I've been having a sense of foreboding, and that was what got me feeling about the RFK thing, that it wasn't going to happen. The fix would somehow be in.
I know. You try to keep your expectations low so that you're pleasantly surprised if they're exceeded. But in RFK's case, I think one of the other things it tells us is just how dangerous the Democrats are with their current use of power and the expected use of power should Kamala prevail this year. It's a really clear statement from RFK that he thinks that that's untenable and shouldn't happen.
His statement was brilliant. The likelihood of the media, covering any of that would be about the same as any social media influencer, criticizing someone publicizing somebody's criticism of themselves, because that's kind of what the media is nowadays. They're just a social media influencer. They just have corporate offices and stock values and things like that.
Yes, as he said today, they are Democratic Party organs, and that basically that he was fighting his whole time against the DNC-aligned mainstream media. He's totally right about that. That's not even up for debate. That's just what happened. And of course, they were not airing his speech as he gave it. So you had to go elsewhere to find it. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. Yeah, great call. Like Phil saying he didn't think this would actually happen and is glad it did. On the things that RFK said, I do want to share with you something. He was bringing up the health of children, which of course he's very interested in, and chronic diseases in the United States. And he was ticking off some of the awful statistics about what, the obesity epidemic and just how bad it is in the United States, and how if we had a real media and like a country that with genuine concern about these issues, we'd be tackling them. And he was trying to call attention to an interview that I found amazing. I just have to tell you, Tucker Carlson did an interview last week with a guy called Callie Means and perhaps more importantly, his sister, a Stanford-educated surgeon called Dr. Casey Means. And I can't recommend this interview enough. They talked about the American food supply, but in particular, like all the processed foods that so many of us consume kind of mindlessly, and just how dangerous it all is. And I found it, a lot of that discussion I've always kind of found like, I was like hesitant around it. Like I didn't find it that compelling, or I'd categorized it in my mind as kind of crazy thinking. I'm like, who cares? Just eat healthy, just keep your portion size right. But no, man, my eyes, I tell you what, I watched that interview. It's a big deal. And these guys have a tremendous amount of credentials. It's crystal clear as they talk about these issues. And here is RFK Junior today in his announcement saying he's stepping away from the race, endorsing Donald Trump. He also said, we should really take seriously these chronic diseases. If we had a real government, they would do that instead of being corrupt and advancing all of this sickness.
In case some of you don't realize how dire the condition is of our children's health and chronic disease in general, I would urge you to view Dr. Carlson's recent interview with Callie Means and his sister, Dr. Casey Means, who is the top graduate of her class at Stanford Medical School. This is an issue that affects all of us far more directly and urgently than any culture war issue and all the other issues that we obsess on and that are tearing apart our country. This is the most important issue. Therefore, it has the potential to bring us together. So let me share a little bit about why I believe it's so urgent. Today, 2/3, we spend more on healthcare than any country on earth, twice what they pay in Europe. And yet we have the worst health outcomes of any nation in the world.
So one of the things he may be getting to this here, but in that interview with the Means siblings, and specifically with Dr. Casey Means, she was really lamenting the fact that in her time in medical school at Stanford, that nutrition was almost not focused on at all. They barely spend any time in their educational training on nutrition. Now, if you're a doctor, if you're looking out for the health of your patient, you want to look out holistically, hopefully, at everything, what's going on with the patient in order to prevent them from even needing these types of surgeries or drastic interventions or drugs for the rest of your life. All of us would prefer not to be in that situation. We want to conduct a healthier life. And she was saying it is bad. What the state of the medical industry is bad insofar as it's not really looking out for the patient in that way. It's looking to turn the patient into a commodity, to just get high volume, just to get a lot of money and these drastic interventions, get them on these drugs. Heck, reminds me of that transgender industry that's making all this cash off of people as they destroy their lives. It's not about health. It's about bleeding them of every last dollar they have.
We're about 79th in health outcomes behind Costa Rica and Nicaragua and Mongolia and other countries. Nobody has a chronic disease burden like we have. And during a COVID epidemic, we had the highest body count of any country in the world.
Because of obesity.
16% of the COVID deaths, and we only have 4.2% of the world's population. And CDC says that's because we are the sickest people on earth.
It's because of obesity. Obesity is the explanation for that. By the way, it's also the explanation for maternal mortality rates.
We have the highest chronic disease rate on earth, and the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So these were people who had immune system collapse, who had mitochondrial dysfunction. And no other country has anything like this. 2/3 of American adults and children suffer from chronic health issues. 50 years ago, that number was less than 1%.
Yeah.
So we've gone from 1% to 66%. In America, 74% of Americans are now overweight or obese, and 50% of our children. 120 years ago, when somebody was obese, they were sent to the circus. There were case reports done about them. Obesity was almost unknown. In Japan, the childhood obesity rate is 3% compared to 50% here. Half of Americans have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. When my uncle was president, I was a boy. Juvenile diabetes was effectively non-existent. A typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes during his entire career, a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And the reasons for this, there's a whole bunch of them, but among them, of course, the processed foods, but also the government's role in advancing all of that. And a lot of our debates around healthcare spending, Medicare and Medicaid and politicians, I won't touch Medicaid. I'm going to make sure we're going to negotiate drug prices and on and on and on. Have you noticed that there's almost no discussion about preventing the need for that spending? None? You want to get control of out-of-control healthcare spending? What about having a healthier country? They never bring it up. That's never even on the menu. It's never even considered. What happened during COVID? What happened during COVID? Did they tell people to get outside? Did they tell people to watch their diets, to cut weight, to decrease the comorbidities, to get their health improved? No, they didn't. They told you to take jabs. They told you to stay inside your home. They told you to be sedentary. They told you to social distance. They told you to do things like wear masks. That didn't work. They didn't really, in any meaningful sense, recommend the underlying solution to all of this, which is, hey, just have a healthier lifestyle. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the big ones is capture. That these industries who stand to profit so much off the government have captured that government and entirely corrupted it. So good for RFK Junior for bringing up those issues. And I really do mean it, that Casey Means interview with Tucker Carlson, I think, is eye-opening. It's wonderful, really well done. And I'm not just saying that because it was literally the interview that was done before I spoke with Tucker earlier this week. My family has been evangelizing it, sending it to each other. And you've got to watch this. It's a really good and useful interview. So I can't recommend it enough. I can't. John is in Fairfax on line 1. John, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Thanks for taking my call. Happy Friday. So I've got a question for you. You probably know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What is the most addictive substance when it comes to health? And I'll give you a hint. It's not a drug. It's not an illegal drug. But what do you think? I'm gonna quiz you and ask you that $25,000 question.
Well, I think I have 2 answers rattling around in my head. I think it's either sugar or high fructose corn syrup.
Yes, you got it. Nope, you got it. Sugar. Sugar is the leading cause of disease in our country. Dementia, Down syndrome. You look at all of the major mental health issues with regards to anything related to chemical. It's sugar. And what is the government promoting? What are these big corporations promoting? What are these kids eating constantly every second of the day? And it's sugar.
Yeah,
so,
the food pyramid.
The
food pyramid, if my memory serves, and I think this came up actually in the interview that Tucker did, they recommend 10% added sugars. They think that's the healthy level, 10%. Wait a second, the government recommends added sugars? What shouldn't the number be 0%? Like in terms of just recommended. Now, if you want to eat sugar, I love sugar. I love a good Oreo. That I'm not, but the idea that the government, in terms of healthy eating, would recommend, well, a healthy diet includes 10% added sugars. What? That's psychotic, isn't it?
Yes, agreed. And you know, look, there's alternatives. Brown sugar is fantastic, but you're right. And these kids, you know, my son's a senior in high school, and he's got 3 or 4 friends that have diabetes. And these kids are like down in snacks and candy
in high school,
all kinds of stuff, and it's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy watching these kids. So, yep, unbelievable. Diabetes as an 18-year-old.
Well, and that thank you very much. Thank you, John. And that lack of health gets to quite a bit. You know, we often talk about things like fertility, and the fact that fertility is plummeting, that the birth rate is plummeting in the United States. I love that the Democrats are like all in on abortion. People aren't even getting pregnant. That's the truth. There's way too many abortions going on that the left is constantly pushing, as if we have like excess humans. We're not replacing ourselves. The birth rates are collapsing. Why is that happening? Well, it's definitely tied up in this health question. Definitely tied up in the types of stuff you're putting into your body, and the government is doing everything it can to maintain the diseases and the lack of health in the United States. And it's working in concert with so many of these big drug companies to make you a chronic user of these drugs and these drastic interventions, rather than to get people healthy in the first place, which would solve a lot of this, wouldn't it? It's a critical thing. Okay, more in a moment, but that's RFK today. Man, he covered a lot. He used that speech pretty effectively. It's like anyone who lies, there's an upper limit. At some point, you have to break character. You can't just lie all the time. In fact, I have 2 examples for you. Here's California Governor Gavin Newsom this week in an interview with a bunch of former Obama administration officials and now do a podcast, casually admitting to them, kind of making fun of the whole process, that this wasn't open at all. There was nothing democratic about installing Kamala Harris. Take a listen. He's just mocking the way that the Democrats actually did it, and then he quickly reverts back to character.
There's an intangible. It's different.
How are you feeling about the switch?
I mean, the switch. No, we went through a very open process, a very inclusive process. It was bottom up. I don't know if you know that. Yes, that's what I've been told to say.
Yes, it was a blitz primary, I believe. That's what they called it.
It's a very, very fast blitz. Yes. I think it was a blink primary, so we call that.
A 30-minute convention. Between a tweet and another tweet.
It's amazing how it happened.
Yeah, it's been amazing. But what is amazing is how unified everybody is.
I love the end of that. He instantly is like, oh, wait a second, get back on the talking points. It's amazing how unified everyone is. But you hear him throughout that is like, yeah, it was a real process, real bottom up. That's what they told me to say. That's a lie. So here's Gavin Newsom, laughing along. He thought it was a safe space, laughing along that it was a total scam to replace Joe with Kamala. Here's also Nancy Pelosi this week, sitting next to Judy Woodruff on PBS, saying that her obsession is not actually even with the presidency, is with the House and the Senate specifically. And she refers to herself as reptilian and cold-blooded.
But they didn't know what they were talking about. We know we're different from the president. We're very discreet, reptilian, cold-blooded. These are the races we have to win. Others are winning the whole country. 10.
And they're all laughing along. Remember, it was Biden who said this week that when he was standing on the tarmac after he left the convention, that the priority in his thinking, he kind of shared was, well, they were worried about the House and the Senate. So we'll see. Yeah, was the effort to get rid of Biden and just install Kamala just an attempt to staunch the bleeding in the House and the Senate? Maybe they think the presidency is a foregone conclusion. We'll see. They have hired all the election meddlers. They're working for the Kamala campaign. So they're always hoping. They're always meddling. Hey, I'll tell you what, have a fantastic weekend. And please listen to my friend, the great one, Mark Levin, who's up next here on the legendary WMAL. I'm back with you Monday.